Poverty is not just the absence of money, but the absence of opportunity. And the United States is a country where you have both freedom and abundant opportunities. And moving to the United States has given me both. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. I came from a close-knit family. I was the third of four children. And the best thing that my parents gave me was the gift of education. Even though I came from a poor family, they gave me education with the instruction that this is the tool that will help me to dig my way out of poverty and ignorance. But what my parents did was that they instilled in us the value of faith, hard work, and not giving up. They made us realize that if you put in the work, you will definitely get the reward. I came without a dime in my pocket. All I had was big dreams, determination to succeed, and the resilience. I got my first job at the age of 14. My job was on a construction site. My duties were to move concrete on a large pan from one end of the construction site to another one. I worked on that day from around 6 in the morning to about 7 at night. At the end of the day, the employer refused to pay me. And the reason was because she did not authorize the foreman to hire me. So I worked from sunup to sundown and didn't get paid. That tore up my spirit. And from that moment on, I decided that I was going to become a lawyer. And I was going to use every ounce of strength within me to fight against injustice, regardless of how powerful the opponent is. I am a man that worked my way up from nothing. I know what it means to feel like you're being unfairly treated, and I'm the person that can stand up to opponents regardless of how big or how powerful they are. Welcome to Legal Angle with Emmanuel Olawale, and thank you for joining us on this show. I have a special guest with me today. She's a friend of the show. She's also a personal friend. She's a judge on the Court of Common Pleas in Franklin County. And this is not her first time on the show. As I said, she's a friend of the show. Welcome to the show, Judge Sheryl Munson.
Thank you so much. It is, as you said, I've been here before, and I so appreciate the show and all that you're doing here, and I am grateful to be back with you.
Oh, thank you. For some people, this is the first time that they will be meeting you. So I don't want to assume that everyone knows your story. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. So I was born and raised in Marion, Ohio, which is a smaller town about 50 miles north of Columbus. I am a first generation college student. So I came to Columbus. I got my undergraduate degree at I'm sorry, at Ohio State. And I was just thinking in my head, I know they just trademarked it to the Ohio State University. So got my undergraduate degree at Ohio State, and then I went on to law school at Ohio State. And at about my third year of law school at Ohio State, I started clerking for the Franklin County Public Defender Office, which was work that really spoke to me in terms of being there to assist and to defend the constitutional rights of many of our underserved populations in Franklin County, people who could be voiceless in a situation where they very much needed a voice. And I loved that work. I, again, started as a law clerk, and then I did the work for 26 years, 22 of which in common pleas court. I did the work there, which is where I am now on the bench. So I loved being a public defender. I really thought that I would probably be a public defender for my entire career. Again, I was very committed to the idea that, no matter what somebody had done, even in very serious cases where they had done very bad things, that everybody deserves at least one person standing next to them who cares about what happens to them, and that people as human beings should not be defined by the worst thing that they ever did. So that propelled me to do that work. Like I said, I intended to be a career public defender, but then, it became apparent that in common pleas court, there were no former public defenders on the bench. So we had former prosecutors, private practitioners, civil practitioners, but nobody coming with a public defender background. And we were doing 80 to 85% of the work in that courthouse. And the folks coming through the doors were coming from those underserved populations. And so I just really felt like it was important to have somebody that, came with that background of public defense on the bench. And so I ran in 2020 and was elected. And I'm very grateful for that. And I am on the bench now.
Thank you. People should not be defined by the worst thing they have done. Oh, that's profound. And what was it like for you growing up in Marion?
So in Marion, originally, I had my father, who I love dearly, struggled with addiction and depression. Undiagnosed. I think he, might have been diagnosed now, but then, I don't. People were not as in tune to mental health issues, and he self-medicated with alcohol, and unfortunately, that resulted in his taking his own life. He committed suicide when I was about 11 years old, and so after that. Eventually, my mother remarried, and we relocated, still in Marion, but somewhere else, out of what was the original neighborhood. And so, from that point on, my mother, obviously, she remarried, but she remained. When my father committed suicide, and that gap that creates in your life. She was just amazing and strong and incredible, and carried me through that, and instilled, in me, the belief that, even though no one had gone to college prior, to me and my family, that I could go to college. She saw that I went to college. She made that happen financially, even though that wasn't easy for her. And so, I think I do part of the public defense work that I do. Maybe a little bit of me is maybe being the person I hope that maybe my father had standing next to him, but also to honor my mother and my stepfather too, who have been very, very big advocates and proponents, and my biggest fans. And so I'm grateful for the opportunities that I was given to ultimately, as I said, go to school, go to law school, and then try to give back.
Thank you. As an 11-year-old, having experienced that kind of tragedy of losing your father to suicide, how did that shape who you are? And how did you overcome that tragedy to turn it into triumph?
And that's a great question. And it's a question that I suppose I've asked myself maybe a million times over the years. My mother, often says now that I'm an adult, we should have probably sent you, to a counselor or something to deal with that. But that wasn't even on our radar. We just persevered. She just loved me and supported me. And so, while obviously a very, very traumatic experience, I feel grateful that my mother was just such a strong and loving presence, that she walked me through that. But I do think that it shaped me, undeniably shaped me, in terms of the way I see the world, and a level of empathy that I have, that, again, wanting to be a public defender, wanting to, again, care for people who I felt, weren't getting the care that they need, with mental health issues, substance use disorders, financially, housing instability. food scarcity, all of those things. I've just always had a heart for those people. And I think a lot of that comes from mourning and yet at the same time loving my father again. I lost him, like I said, at, around 11 years of age. So I have memories of him, right? But I couldn't sit down and we never got to those conversations that you would love to have with a parent as they're older, their life philosophies and those things. I didn't have those. But he was always a good and loving man. He just had, the disease of addiction. And I think some attendant mental health issues. And so I think that created within me a desire to kind of support and love people who needed that the way, again, I wish that my father had been supported and loved. And I'm not saying that he wasn't. He had family that loved him. My mother loved him. I loved him. But, sometimes it just wasn't enough. But I believe that had mental health been more of something that we talked about, maybe his doctors would have done that, would have dealt with that. And he would not have just continued to, kill himself with addiction and ultimately suicide.
Thank you. So you transmute your grief to a desire to stand up for the voiceless, the downtrodden, those who are powerless.
Yes.
So that's how you process your grief.
I think
The grief.
No, I thank you for that. Actually, I think that's a great way to articulate it. Yes.
Thank you. And do you have siblings?
I do. Well, so I have half siblings. So I had an older brother and older sister, both of whom came from my father's first marriage. My brother passed some time ago, and they're older than I. My sister is about 10 years older than I am, but she lives in Marion. She has raised her children, and does very well, and is happy and healthy. But we the way, then of course shared parenting was also different. So they spent pretty much most of the time with their mother and then would spend summers with us. And so that's the kind of relationship I had with them growing up, was when I would spend my summers, they would be visiting, with us. And then, of course, as adults, we formed stronger relationships. But we weren't raised in the same household, though, of course, they both suffered, obviously, the loss of my father the same way I did.
Yeah. And what was it like for you being that first person to go to college and to graduate from college and to be where you are right now?
It is. I mean, first of all, I'm obviously very proud to have done that, but I am very indebted to have done that, because all of these people I speak about, my mother, my step-parent, or my stepfather, my sister, my brother when he was alive, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone just supported me 100%. And always, just any accomplishment that I made, they were just there for me and congratulating me and always telling me, how proud they were of me. And so I would just have to say that because I come from a family full of people that easily could have graduated college. It's not that they couldn't graduate college. It's just that, different choices were made for financial reasons and those sorts of things. And so I'm grateful that I got to do that. And I'm grateful to have been surrounded by kind and conscientious people who wanted that for me.
Thank you. What made you decide to become a lawyer? Were you inspired by a person, by a situation, or what inspired that thought?
So I will tell you, when I first went to college, what I wanted to be was a journalist. I loved to write, and I saw that as a way to tell stories for people, that I would, for people, again, who were voiceless, who weren't being heard, that maybe I could tell their stories and bring their stories, you know, uh, to the public, either, through public, and, then of course my idea of journalism was print journalism, because that's what we were, that's what it was. But then, so in undergraduate school, my majors were English and criminology. And so somewhere along there, I think, the criminology kind of sociology aspect of that second major really began to interest me, like in the criminal justice system, why people come into the system, ideas of generational poverty and viewpoints, and why there's this cycle of families, excuse me, generation after generation entering the system, and why that was. And then that slowly transitioned me to the desire to go to law school and to represent those people.
Thank you. And
I apologize. Thank you.
while you were in law school, did you had an idea that you wanted to become a public defender, or you just wanted to become a lawyer?
I think very early that I knew I wanted to practice criminal law, and I knew that I wanted to practice criminal defense. And then it would have been my third year, I was on the trial advocacy team, where you, sort of a mock trial situation. And my teacher or proctor for that was an incredible man by the name of Bob Crevachet. And he also did the criminal law clinics, where you could go into the courthouse and actually, practice in municipal courts in Delaware, and then here in Columbus, as under his tutelage. And working with him, at one point, you just get to know somebody in those contexts. And he said, you belong at the public defender's office. I can, who you are, where your sympathies lie, what you want to do. I think you belong at the public defender's office. And so he made an introduction for me with someone who ultimately hired me there as a law clerk. And, instantaneously, it was clear that, to me, that's where I was supposed to be.
Thank you. And in the spirit of, respecting the memory of your father, although that's not how what you have couched it to be, but I can see the connection. You just started a mental health docket at the courthouse.
Yes.
And also in the spirit of standing up for those who may not have others standing up for them, or not have adequate help. You've decided to start this docket.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about this special mental health docket?
Yes. So, and I, as you're aware, but for the viewers, kind of background on all of this. Once someone with a mental health issue enters the criminal justice system, there are traditionally only two very formal paths by which their mental health is acknowledged and dealt with. They can be deemed not competent to stand trial, which again is a very high standard to meet. Or they could actually be found not guilty by reason of insanity, of committing the offense. Again, a very high standard to meet, and a very low percentage, particularly not guilty by reason of insanity, is almost unheard of. I think in the 26 years of my practice, maybe I had 5. It's just a very low number, because, we use a very old standard, which is that you couldn't know right from wrong, and that's the product of a serious mental illness. And I think that standard is a little outdated. But in any case, you have those folks who meet those standards. But then you have a huge number of justice-involved individuals that aren't meeting those standards, but are in the system for the only reason that they have mental health issues. So to me, again, having practiced in the courthouse, having so many clients who I knew were only here for mental health reasons, but they were competent or deemed competent. They weren't not guilty by reason of insanity. And so they kind of fall into this hole in between, you know, what is legally acknowledged as as a mental health excuse, and the other folks that are involved for other reasons, other motivations, not mental health. They were falling into this pit, and it's not just my observation. You could talk to many people within the system, prosecutors, defense attorneys alike, who would tell you that. And so we also know next door in municipal court, there is a mental health specialty docket meeting the needs of those folks. But what I wanted to do and what I have done is a little bit different than a traditional specialty docket, because many times the specialty dockets are lower level offenses. You come through the specialty docket, you do well, and then your case is dismissed or your record is sealed. But those are not the folks that I'm addressing. I'm addressing moderate to high risk offenders that, and I like to talk about my docket, not so much in terms of being a traditional, diversion docket, but a prison diversion docket. So the folks that I'm dealing with they've been to other judges, they continue to reoffend, they cannot comply with traditional probation pathways, and the judges and the prosecutors, and they're at their wits' end, and they're like, I don't want to incarcerate this person. I know they're mentally ill, but I don't know what else to do with them. And then they have the option of moving them to my docket.
Yeah. Thank you. So what do you have, like, the standards or criteria to admit defendants?
I'm sorry.
What are the requirements?
I'm sorry, the requirements of who can join the docket?
Yes.
Okay. So nobody is excluded from my docket by the degree of felony or the nature of the felony. Because again, so many specialty dockets are excluding folks, you've had an offensive violence on your record. But we know statistically that coming in with an offensive violence into a specialty docket does not increase your chances of recidivism or reoffending. And actually, some of those folks are the most successful on specialty dockets because they're getting that intensive treatment and attention that they need. And, in one of the beauties of the specialty docket, and I've heard this, and I'll tell you a little story about one of my first encounters with a participant last week, which actually brought me to tears while I was on the bench during our status review hearing, but that these folks have not been in front of a judge in any other capacity other than they're scared to death. Is this judge going to send me to prison today? What is this judge going to say to me? Is this judge going to tell me, I'm an awful person, or I have this issue, I'm a bad person? But on the specialty docket, they don't have that relationship with the judge. Instead, they have the judge caring about what happens to them, kind of leading their treatment endeavor. And I'm a little off point to your question, but the only requirement you have to get on my docket is that your case has to be probation eligible, so that or rape or a gun specification, you would not be eligible because you can't get probation. And my docket is actually a condition of probation. So you have to be probation eligible. And our treatment team discusses it. We'll look at your records. We do an assessment to see, what your mental health needs are. We reach out to treatment providers, residential facilities, and say, can we put together a comprehensive treatment program that assists this person in achieving, the life that they deserve as a human being to live, and also protect the community, so that we're doing what we need to do to keep these folks from reoffending, and certainly prevent them from victimizing other individuals. But what I wanted to mention, because it meant so much to me, is that we give all our participants journals and calendars when they first start, because some of these folks have never kept a calendar. It's just not, they weren't raised to keep a calendar. It's not the way time is organized in their households. And so they're required to write down, all their appointments, where they're coming, so that they have a visual view of that. And we can make sure they know what's going on. And I've also given them journals. And the journals, of course, are private. And I've assured them that I will not look at their journals. But if they want to share from their journals, they're welcome to. And so at my last status review hearing, this amazing young man said, I've written something in my journal. I've written a poem that I would like to share. And I don't have, the text in front of me, but basically he opened the poem with talking about that morning was the first day that he woke up excited to go to a court appearance, because he knew he was coming to this court appearance. And I don't think there was really a dry eye in the house, including myself, because in creating this docket, it took me a year. We traveled around the state. We looked at other dockets everywhere. We created, program descriptions. We created participant agreements. We got all the other judges onboarded. We created a local rule to make that happen. We applied to the Supreme Court for initial certification. We did all of these things. And now that people are entering the docket, and to sit there and have that young man include that in what he wanted to share with us really was, the wow, this has all been worth it moment. And so that it just, I don't know. It I mean, you do work, the similar work to what I did as an attorney and in the community. And how it is that you can lose 15 battles, but when you win that one and you touch that person's heart, that renews your spirit.
Yeah, it's great. It's rewarding.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I'm understanding you correctly, are you saying that only defendants who have been convicted can be sent to the special docket?
Right. And so that's, again, it's a little bit different conceptualization of what we think of as specialty dockets and diversion programs. Like so many, like in diversion, if they successfully complete, then they won't be charged. But I really felt like those with mental health issues and lower level offenses and without significant prior records, their needs were being met through intervention and lieu programs. They were giving reductions in charges as long as they successfully completed, their mental health treatment on probation. Then the judges would seal those records. And so the folks that I'm dealing with, literally, it is the last chance before another judge just says, I don't know what else to do but send you to prison. And which is what we're trying to avoid, is the incarceration of the mentally ill, because we know that, the legacy of deinstitutionalization in this country, we tore down all the mental hospitals, but we didn't put into place community-based mental health services to catch those folks from falling. And so they comprise, a large number of our unhoused populations. They don't get adequate treatment, and they are in and out of jail constantly, to the point that our local jails and the Ohio prison system, and this is true nationally, becomes one of the greatest. And I use the word provider almost ironically, of mental health services. And they're not designed to do that. Our correctional facilities are not designed to treat mental health impacted individuals. Our local jails are not designed to do that. They should not be expected to do that. But that's what's happening. And because they're not equipped to do that, what often it becomes is just our warehousing of mentally health, of mentally, people with mental health issues. And so to cut down on that, to decrease, one of our stated goals in our mission, which we submitted to the Supreme Court, is obviously to reduce reoffending so that they're not victimizing folks in the community, but also that we're reducing days of incarceration. Because even if I save one individual 1 day of incarceration, we know what an impact that has on a person's life. I mean, to be incarcerated for 1 day can completely derail an individual, and then actually leads, to worse predictions and outcome for how they're going to fare, and whether or not they're going to reoffend. And that is even more true for those with mental health issues. It's just, in my mind, immoral that you are warehousing people with mental health issues because you don't know what else to do with them. Granted, they've committed criminal offenses, but it's substantially mitigating circumstances as to why they're doing that. And I'll tell you, a lot of our docket so far, we have a lot of arson offenders because there's a very strong correlation between arson and mental health. And I'm not talking about folks, that are burning down buildings with people in them and not that kind of thing. I'm talking about, a lot of our female mental health participants with arson offenses. A lot of times the arson is a suicide attempt. So they have taken an overdose of pills and then maybe they set the couch on fire, to die, or they've literally doused themselves in gasoline and hope to die. And those are arsons. So there's a strong correlation between the arson docket and the mental health docket. So certainly hoping to help with those individuals again, because it's, and as well as I know, Manny, that there's this, sometimes, the public, they want retribution and they want vengeance and they want an eye for an eye. And even if that is your perspective, even if you don't have a heart that says, I don't want to, incarcerate people these are human beings and we need to be creating better opportunities for them. Even if you don't necessarily feel that way, then you should at least understand that these folks, and unless it's the most serious offenses, unless we're talking about murders where people are spending life in prison, very serious sex offenders where they may be spending life in prison. Other than those cases, these folks are coming back out. They're coming out of the institution and they're coming back into your community. And are they coming out better or worse? And I would suggest that to incarcerate a mentally ill individual for a significant period of time and then release he or she into the community, they're not coming out better. They're not going to come out better, and they're going to continue to live, to be destabilized, to be without housing, to be without food, to be not properly medicated, and then they're right back to offending and right back in jail. So why not, on the front end, try to give them the things they need to avoid incarceration? Take that chance, that instead of sending you to prison right now, let's take this chance that when you have to come see me every 2 weeks, and in between you see my coordinator and you see my probation officer and you see your mental health provider, and if you need more stabilization, we can put you into a residential facility. Why not make that effort in hopes that we can break the cycle of incarceration and reoffending?
Thank you. So you take into consideration the foundational factor that leads to them committing crime in the first place.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
yes. And a lot of people don't see that because mental health itself is invisible.
Right.
If you have physical injuries like a broken bone, people won't tell you to walk it off or get over it. But with mental health, they can see it.
100%. And that's, and again, and as I said, when I was speaking to my own father, I don't think that my family would have necessarily stigmatized him had he been talking about, I think I'm depressed, or, I'm anxious and this is why I'm drinking. I just think we lacked a fundamental awareness of that connection, or paying attention to that connection. But we know now those connections exist. And so um, we just have to treat it, as you said. I mean, you wouldn't tell somebody, like you said, with a broken bone to just walk it off. And we shouldn't be telling someone with mental health challenges to just walk it off. And it's very much a wraparound concept on the mental health docket, because of course we have dual diagnosis folks. Of course we have substance use disorder going on within the mental health population, because they are self-medicating. They're more prone to substance use disorder. So we're also, running them, making sure that they're not using street chemicals. I mean, they're urine tested. If we have to address the substance use disorder, we're addressing that as well. And the docket's designed that you can graduate from it in 2 years. But of course, it may take longer than that, because it's not linear. People make progress, they step back, they make progress, they step back. But before they leave the docket to graduate, they have to be, and the onus is not on them to be this. We are assisting them in becoming financially stable, either through some sort of employment or some sort of assistance that they can receive, housing stability, food stable, all of these things, because housing is critical to everything. If you're worried about where you're going to sleep tonight, you're not worried about whether or not you should pick your prescription up at the pharmacy, and that prescription is what you need to be healthy. Those things go by the wayside. If you don't know where dinner is coming tonight, or you don't know how to feed your children tonight, you're not prioritizing your mental health. And so we need to make sure all of that is in place, that we're giving these wraparound services to our folks. And the family's very much invited to be involved as well. For instance, the young man I was talking about who wrote the moving poem, his mother and grandmother come to every status review hearing. And I invite her, to talk about, how she thinks he's doing and what input she has, because of course she's dealt with this for far many more years than I have, with her son's mental health issue. And she is supportive, and she is a positive person in his life. So she's included in conversations. It's just, it's very much a village concept. This is a village, and we're here. And whoever we need to bring into the village to support that person, that's what we're going to do.
Thank you. And how are the people you bring into the village identified? Do they have to go through psychological assessment, or does it have to be something they affirmatively apply for?
So the way it's working now is, because they are moderate to high risk offenders, many of them have already been connected with the system. They've already been on probation. Some of them may very well have been found not competent in the past, but restored to competency. And so they may have a prior diagnosis in all the mental health records. And so I'll just give you an example. For instance, if you're an attorney, you have this client who was on probation, they've committed another somewhat serious offense. That there are mental health issues. In the past, maybe you've represented this person and they've not been competent, but then they took their medication and they're restored to competency, and you think they're competent now, but they can't comply with probation. They've just acquired another case, fairly serious felony case. And the judge and the prosecutor and probation says, we can't this person's not working with us. We can't continue to invest these resources when nothing's happening and they're reoffending. And the judge says, yes, they're reoffending. I can't continue to give them chance after chance after chance if they're not going to do what I want them to do. And the prosecutor may say, I get that this person is mentally ill, but I don't know what else to do. And so then they would make a referral, if the judge agrees, to my docket. And then my mental health coordinator will reach out if there's any prior linkage to any other mental health agencies in the county, Southeast, Community for New Directions, both on my treatment team. They come to every treatment team. They have a lot of prior contacts with these folks. And we say, oh, there is a prior diagnosis. So we know that they have the diagnosis. And then we, brainstorm among our treatment team. And our treatment team has a representative of the prosecutor's office, so that obviously community concerns, victim concerns are in play when we have these conversations. And I'm very big on a due process concept, because I worry that sometimes on specialty dockets, due process goes out the window a little bit. People are just coming in and I just want to be on this docket. So, we're not necessarily paying attention to, could they even prove this case against me before I say I'm guilty and then enter the docket? All that work has been done. They have an attorney. This attorney has evaluated this case. This is the best option for this person. And an attorney is always welcome if your client is being discussed for acceptance or being discussed in any other respect, those attorneys are welcome at my treatment team meetings. And they're welcome at every status review hearing. And if for some reason the attorneys don't stay connected with that case, we have a full-time public defender who is always there, so that our participants always have defense counsel available to them, so that any point in time, if they question, what are my rights in this situation, or I violated, the tenets of the docket, am I facing revocation, because then it becomes a probation revocation. What can I do? Lawyers are always available. And that's important to me, that they never feel that they're not represented. And so they make the referral to us. We do the assessment. If they have no prior diagnosis, then we find someone to do that assessment so we can get a proper diagnosis. And then once the assessment's complete, we know there's a mental health issue. We all agree in the treatment team, this person is a good fit for the docket. We think we can help this individual. Then they sign on after they've read the participant agreement, after we've gone over, sometimes we have them come and observe. So what this docket looks like. Is this something you want to be a part of? And then we formally accept them onto the docket. And then if the case was with another judge, then they get formally transferred to my docket, and they remain on my docket from that point going forward.
Thank you. You mentioned that victims' concerns are taken into consideration. Does that mean that the victim and the prosecutor must agree to the transfer to the special docket?
What I will say is this: if we are talking about a crime of violence, and someone has been victimized physically, even sexually in some way, yes, that person. I'm not going to bring someone onto the docket that the victim really feels as though his or her desires, are not being acknowledged, and the prosecutor will stand up to that for the most part. Now, if we were talking about maybe theft offenses or something like that, and the victim had some protest, I always have the authority to trump that, to say you're coming anyway in every case. But certainly when we're talking about someone being traumatized and victimized by someone, I want to take the victim's concerns into account, but I also urge the prosecutor to have a conversation with the victim and talk about, right now you may feel good if somebody says, we're just going to send your perpetrator to prison for a year. And then you feel this, I've been protected, I've been heard, they deserve to go to prison. But then again, as I said, this person's coming back out into the community. So, what if they come to my docket and I put them into a lockdown situation, say CBCF, for 4 to 6 months, and they're working my program, but they're still being housed in a lockdown facility, and we're giving them the tools. And, obviously, part of our rules are they'll never have contact with you again. Sometimes when you have those conversations, then a victim will say to you, that's what I want to happen. But certainly, yes, victims' concerns matter. I cannot say to you 100% in every case that if a victim or prosecutor said no, that there is not a situation where I might not overrule that and bring them onto the docket, just because every case is so individual. But again, great deference given certainly to victims of violent crimes, and again, I am not precluding sex offenders from my docket, which some dockets do, but it's got to be a very special circumstance when you would bring a sex offender onto the docket.
Thank you. One of the symptoms of mental health is denial. You have a lot of people suffering from mental health and their families denying it. What happens in a situation where you have a referral and the person themselves are denying their condition?
Right. And that's a great question, because in addition to our assessment to see if in fact you are diagnosed with a mental health condition, there's also a readiness assessment, so that you will sit down with our coordinator, and if we have somebody that's clearly mentally ill but just says, I'm not doing that, you can't tell me that I'm quote unquote, I'm not crazy, you can't tell me that, I'm not doing that. I don't want my family to think I'm crazy. I would rather go to prison than have somebody say that I'm crazy. So that matters, because obviously they're not going to be successful on the docket with that attitude. But I will say that my coordinator of my docket, who's amazing, will have very candid conversations and sort of, I don't want to say sell the docket, but sort of explain, look at the course of behavior that you've engaged in. I mean, haven't you ever felt like you're doing something and you're not in control of that? And well, yes. And haven't you felt this way or that way? And sometimes you can bring those folks around to at least a level of acceptance that you could start working with them. But certainly readiness and a desire to engage is also a criteria for them joining the docket.
Who pays for the treatment and evaluation?
So we are linked through the probation department. So any services that would normally be meted out if you were on probation, it's the same mechanism. So that, in a lot of cases, I mean, if you have private insurance, that's going to pay for it. But obviously Medicaid, if you have it in place, that'll pay for it. But then, of course, we have programming that will meet the needs of people who don't have that in place. It's a rare situation where they're not going to at least have Medicaid in place to help with this. But very much like if you were to do a criminal case and your client was placed on probation and given drug treatment, it's the same kind of payment situation there. Now, I will say that there is funding available for other supplemental resources, maybe to assist in housing, transportation, all of these things. Those funding sources exist. In order to get, for the most part, apply to that funding, you do have to have received initial certification from the Ohio Supreme Court. So the first thing to understand is you can run a specialty docket without certification by the Supreme Court. But of course, we want that certification, A, because we know that's best practices, and we know we want to be doing it right, and we want to be doing it. It's ever evolving. The changes that need to be made in the specialty dockets, and the Supreme Court is on top of all of that. So we want that support, but also a lot of the funding is dependent upon whether or not you have certification or initial certification from the Supreme Court. And as I alluded to earlier, we applied, sent them all our documents. They did come back with some suggested edits, just because, again, as things change, there is what has traditionally been called a continuum of sanctions. So, for instance, you're not meeting your appointments, you're providing positive urine screens for unprescribed medication or street chemicals. There's a sanction, which could be, a homework assignment, or you have to provide more frequent urine. Incarceration is the last sanction you ever want to get to, because obviously that defeats the purpose of the docket. But now the Supreme Court is, best evidence, best practices says we shouldn't be talking about a continuum of sanctions. We should be talking about therapeutic adjustments, because that is more neutral and affirming language for your participants. So we had an old model. We talked about sanctions. And so, for instance, they sent back our documents and suggested, please change this to therapeutic adjustments. So we made those changes and resubmitted. And we did receive an email last week saying we should expect our initial certification very soon. So we're very excited about that. And that will allow us to apply for funding, whereas we have some folks that, again, Medicaid is meeting most of those needs. Some have private insurer. The probation department through the county has a certain amount of funding that can, for instance, if you have somebody going into a residential facility and they don't have a supply of their psychotropic medication and cannot afford it, there is a fund through the probation department that will pay for that medication, which we have access to. And then also outside funding could give us this more financial support for those things that are a little bit outside of the box.
Thank you. And does the docket itself have a capacity?
All right, so yes is the answer. Best practices so it's a phased docket. So there are 4 phases, and the initial 2 phases, or at least the initial first phase, is people have to, again, be seeing me at status review twice a month. They're seeing their coordinator, their probation officer, their treatment providers in a very intense time frame. As they move through the phases, you could get to the point where you're only coming in to see me once a month because you're working maybe, or you're engaged in, if you're unable to work, we're putting you in volunteer settings, so you're still having positive interactions and feeling productive. We have given you a peer support person, who's helping you with life skills and those sorts of things. And so you're evolving through the docket and it becomes less intense. For phase 1, best practices for the docket I'm running, which is moderate to high risk individuals that need a lot of attention and a lot of monitoring, is 30 people. But as some of those folks move into later phases, you could increase the number in the first phase. So maybe you get 45 or 50, but they're spaced out over the phases. Right now, the docket is populating very quickly. I'll tell you that I'm excited to see how people are excited about this docket because, again, as I said, judges, prosecutors, criminal defense attorneys, probation officers know
Thank you for your patience. We're having a little technical problem.
All right.
I think Judge Munson is back.
Yes, I'm back. I don't know where I lost you, but I will just say the answer to your question is, in the early phases, the best practices is 30 people. The big issue will become, once we get to that point, having to say no, which will be hard. So we hope to create maybe kind of a waiting list situation where, people aren't waiting too long. People could leave the program, they could advance to another phase, and we could bring in some more folks. It just really depends. I an amazing Judge Allison Breaux, which it Breaux. I always want to acknowledge her. She's in Summit County. She is running a special this similar docket in Summit County. I visited her twice. She was very generous with her materials with me. Um, and we've had very candid conversations, and she's, occasionally you're at 30, but there's somebody you just need to bring on, and you just do the extra work.
Thank you. And your story is very amazing because you turned your loss to a kind of inspiration to help people. You turned your grief to growth. You turned your tragedy to triumph, and you became this trailblazer. Running for judge as a public defender and becoming the first public defender judge in modern times. Uh, on your first day on the job, what does it feel like having gone through this process with your father, with your upbringing, and finding yourself wearing the robe on the bench? What was it like?
I will say that the fundamental emotion for me was gratitude. I was just grateful um, to have to put myself in a position where I could do the things to hopefully help as many people as possible. Obviously, I hope my father, wherever he is proud of the work that I'm doing. I know my family is proud of it, but really, it's just gratitude, and actually, and it's humbling in so many ways too, because to be elected is to have the voters of Franklin County, the majority of those voters, saying they have confidence in you, that you can do this. And I really, the other thing I really want to say is that, like I said, I practiced for 26 years, 22 years in this courthouse. And in that amount of time, you appear in front of so many judges that you kind of, take bits and pieces about, this is what I love about this judge. If I were a judge, I would do it that way. I don't like this, I wouldn't do it that way. And you kind of cobble together the idea of the judge you want to be. And also then you bring your own heart and your own soul to that role. And I'm just so grateful. And one thing I really have to emphasize is that, I still try to be in the community as much as possible. I believe wholeheartedly that you have a responsibility, that if you're sitting on the bench making decisions about people's lives, that you have a responsibility to be in the community so that you know where these folks are coming from. For you to just, go from your house to your car to the courthouse every day and make judgments, life altering judgments about people without spending your free time with them, talking to them, seeing what their struggles are, seeing what they're dealing with. To me, and again, this is only my personal opinion, I can't speak for any other judge, but that would be irresponsible as far as I'm concerned. The way, in terms of the judge I want to be, I consider myself a servant of the people of Franklin County. I was elected to serve them. My courtroom is always open. It is the people's courtroom. And I am accountable to everything that I do, for everything that I do, and to do it with compassion and dignity, giving compassion and dignity to everybody. And so I would say, gratitude and humble feelings are my predominant feelings. I'm grateful every day that I get up, that I have been given, that the folks of Franklin County had the faith in me for me to do this job, and I am determined to do it in a way that honors all of them.
Thank you. And you've been educating the public for the past almost an hour now. what does it mean to you to appear on legal angle to talk to the community?
Again, I just grateful again because and I've this, we've spoken privately many times about how valuable I know that this show is, and educating folks, because again, so many people who aren't coming into the courthouse, they what they know is maybe what they see on TV, and we know what that's worth in many occasions. So to be able to kind of give folks a glimpse into at least what I'm doing as a judge, the mental health docket, the docket in general, allowing them to see their elected officials as human beings, with histories, with flaws, traumas in their past. I just think it's invaluable for them to see the people they've elected sitting down, talking to them with transparency, with honesty, and admitting that we're human. We're human. I have, as you've alluded to, the tragedy, my past with my father, that I've done the best to make the most of. And I just thank you for the opportunity, to talk to as many people as I can talk to. And this is a great platform for that. And again, I just want to reiterate, I go to community centers, law schools, undergraduate schools. Anytime I have an opportunity to talk to people, I'm grateful because, again, I think one of our obligations in the judiciary is accessibility and transparency. And people need to know what's happening in their courthouses, and they're entitled to know what's happening in their courthouses.
Thank you. And thank you for your time on the show today, because I know that you have to take time out of your busy schedule to do this. Thank you.
And thank you again for the opportunity. I love and respect you and everything that you do. And I know all about turning trauma and tragedy into triumph. So you know how much I respect you for that. So thank you.
Thank you. I respect you too. It's mutual.
Yes.
And for those of you who are either watching or listening to this as a podcast, we respect your time too, and we respect you. And we love you for joining us. Until next time, stay blessed.
Yes.
Bye for now.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.